The sun was setting over the dusty plains of Wyoming, casting long shadows across the barren land. A faint breeze carried with it the scent of dry earth and sagebrush, a reminder of how unforgiving this part of the world could be. Somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote let out its mournful cry, echoing through the stillness of the evening. It was a place where secrets hid easily, where men ran from their pasts, seeking refuge in the vast emptiness that stretched as far as the eye could see. And on this particular night, one such man found himself crouched low inside an old barn at the edge of a forgotten ranch. His breath came in shallow gasps, his heart pounding like a runaway horse against his ribs. He had been running for days, ever since they caught sight of him in Red Rock Junction. The law wasn't far behind now. He could feel it in his bones. The barn offered little comfort. Its wooden walls were weathered and cracked, allowing gusts of wind to whistle through the gaps. Straw littered the floor, brittle and yellow with age, crunching beneath his boots whenever he shifted his weight. In one corner stood a goat, tethered by a frayed rope to a post. It bleated softly, its large eyes watching him with a curious indifference. He leaned back against the wall, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill in the air. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. The edges were worn, stained with dirt and grime from countless miles of travel. On it was written a single name, Martha. That name had driven him here, across deserts and mountains, through storms and scorching heat. Little did he know then what awaited him when he finally reached this forsaken place. Outside, the sky darkened rapidly, stars beginning to twinkle faintly above. The silence of the night pressed heavily around him, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. But even amidst this quiet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching him, until suddenly the goat stirred. Its head snapped up, ears perked as if sensing something beyond the confines of the barn. For a moment, the man froze, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver tucked in his belt. Then, just as quickly, he dismissed the thought. It was probably nothing more than a stray dog or some other creature drawn by the smell of hay. Still, caution lingered in his mind, urging him to remain vigilant. But then, the goat began to pull against its tether, tugging insistently at the rope. At first, it seemed almost playful, but soon the animal's movements grew frantic, its hooves scraping against a hard-packed dirt floor. The man watched warily, unsure whether to intervene or let the beast exhaust itself. "Settle down," he muttered under his breath, though his voice lacked conviction. As if in response, the goat redoubled its efforts, dragging the post that was tied to several inches closer to the center of the barn. Something glinted faintly in the dim light, a piece of metal partially buried beneath the straw. Curiosity piqued. The man rose slowly to his feet, careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle the animal further. Kneeling beside the goat, he brushed aside the layer of straw, revealing a small, rusted key. His fingers closed around it hesitantly, turning it over in his palm. It looked ancient, its surface etched with intricate patterns that spoke of craftsmanship long abandoned. Yet there was something familiar about it, a nagging sense of recognition that made his stomach twist uneasily. Before he could ponder it further, a sound outside drew his attention, a soft crunch of gravel beneath boots. His hand shot instinctively to his gun, gripping it tightly as he crept toward the entrance of the barn. Peering cautiously through the gap between the boards, he saw two figures silhouetted against a moonlit landscape. One carried a lantern, its flickering glow illuminating the other's face. A woman, her expression unreadable in the pale light. For a heartbeat, he considered slipping away unnoticed. But something held him back, perhaps the same inexplicable pull that had brought him here in the first place. Instead, he remained hidden, listening intently as the woman spoke. "We should have been here hours ago," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "If we're too late—" Her companion, a tall man with broad shoulders, interrupted her. "Don't jump to conclusions, Martha. There's still time." At the sound of her name, the fugitive's breath hitched. How did she know? Had someone told her? Or was this merely a coincidence, cruelly mocking his desperate search? Unbelievable as it seemed, the pieces began to fall into place. This was no ordinary ranch, nor was the woman simply a passerby. She was connected to the reason he'd come here, to the mystery surrounding the name Martha, and whatever answers lay buried within these walls. Refusing to wait any longer, he stepped out of the barn, gun raised but pointed harmlessly at the ground. Both figures turned sharply, startled by his sudden appearance. The man's hand instinctively moved toward his own holster, while the woman's gaze locked onto the fugitive's face, her eyes widening in recognition. "You!" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Who are you?" he demanded, his tone sharp despite the turmoil churning inside him. "What you know about Martha?" Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she glanced meaningfully at the goat still tethered inside the barn, then back at him. Following her gaze, he felt a strange stirring in his chest, as though the truth was tantalizingly close yet frustratingly out of reach. Little did they all know, however, that the real revelation was yet to come. Minutes passed in tense silence, each person weighing the other's intentions. Finally, the man accompanying Martha broke the stalemate. "Put down your weapon," he ordered firmly. "We're not here to hurt you." Reluctantly, the fugitive lowered his gun, though he kept it within easy reach. "Talk," he growled. "Explain why I'm here and who you really are." Martha took a step forward, her movements deliberate and measured. "My name is Martha Jackson," she began, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "And I believe you're looking for answers about my brother, Samuel." The word struck him like a physical blow. Samuel. The name meant nothing to him, yet it resonated deeply, stirring memories he'd tried so hard to bury. Memories of betrayal, loss, and guilt heavy enough to crush a man. "But Samuel isn't here," Martha continued, her voice softening. "Not anymore. He left years ago, after everything fell apart." Falling apart was putting it mildly. The fugitive remembered now. The night the bank was robbed, the shots fired, the blood staining the streets of Red Rock Junction. And Samuel, his partner, his friend, had vanished without a word, leaving behind only whispers and rumors. "Why bring me here?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "What does any of this have to do with me?" Martha hesitated, glancing once more at the goat. "Come inside," she said finally. "There's something you need to see." Against his better judgment, he followed her back into the barn. The goat bleated plaintively as they approached, its movements growing more agitated with every passing second. Martha untied the rope, allowing the animal to wander freely for the first time. To his surprise, it didn't bolt for freedom. Instead, it circled the barn methodically, its hooves uncovering patches of dirt and debris until it stopped directly beneath the rafters. "There," Martha said, pointing upward. "That's where it all began." Following her finger, the fugitive spotted a trapdoor embedded in the ceiling, its edges nearly invisible against the aged wood. With trembling hands, he climbed a rickety ladder, pushing open the hatch to reveal a hidden compartment filled with dusty documents and photographs. Among them was a letter addressed to him, signed by Samuel himself. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes as he read the words scrawled across the page, words of apology, of regret, of love unspoken. Buried within those lines was the truth he'd sought for so long. Samuel hadn't abandoned him. He'd sacrificed himself to protect him, taking the blame for crimes neither of them truly committed. And now, standing amidst the remnants of a life torn apart by circumstance, the fugitive understood the final twist of fate. The goat, seemingly insignificant, had played its part in bringing him here, not just to uncover secrets, but to confront the darkness within himself. In the end, it wasn't justice or vengeance that defined him. It was redemption. As the fugitive sat amidst the hidden compartment, the weight of Samuel's letter pressed heavily upon him. Each word was a shard of glass, cutting through the layers of anger and resentment he had carried for so long. The lantern Martha had brought now hung from one of the rafters, casting flickering shadows across the dusty documents scattered around him. Outside, the night remained silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of an owl. Martha stood below, watching him with an expression that mingled sympathy and resolve. Her companion, whose name the fugitive still didn't know, leaned against the barn door, his arms crossed over his chest. The tension in the air was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Finally, the fugitive lowered the letter, his hands trembling slightly. "Why did you bring me here?" he asked again, this time with a softer edge to his voice. "If Samuel wanted me to find this, why not send it directly?" Martha sighed, stepping closer to the base of the ladder. "Because," she began, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow, "Samuel never intended for you to see these things while he was alive. He believed it would only complicate matters further. But complications were inevitable," the fugitive countered bitterly. "Look where we are now. Me hiding in a barn, pursued by the law, all because of choices made years ago." "Choices forced upon us," Martha corrected sharply. "You think Samuel enjoyed robbing that bank? You think either of you had a choice when desperation drove you to such lengths?" Her words stung, but they rang true. The fugitive remembered the days leading up to the robbery. The hunger, the cold, the endless struggle to survive in a world that seemed determined to break them. Samuel had been right. Sometimes a man was pushed so far that even the line between right and wrong blurred into insignificance. Still, guilt gnawed at him. "I should have stopped him," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "I should have found another way." "You couldn't," Martha replied firmly, "and neither could Samuel. But instead of blaming yourself or each other, you need to focus on what comes next." "What comes next?" he echoed hollowly. "The law is after me. Every town I pass through, every face I see. It's only a matter of time before someone recognizes me. How can there be a next when my past keeps catching up?" Martha's gaze softened, and for a moment she looked older than her years. "That's why Samuel left you this," she said, gesturing toward the document surrounding him. "Not just explain what happened, but to give you a chance, to let you choose your own path, free from the chains of guilt and fear." The fugitive stared at her, unsure whether to believe her or dismiss her words as wishful thinking. Yet deep down, something stirred, a spark of hope, fragile but persistent. Could he truly walk away from the life he'd been running from? Could he leave behind the man he'd become and start anew? Before he could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the moment. All three of them froze, listening intently as the rhythmic thud grew louder, closer. Martha's companion reached for his gun, his movements swift and practiced. The fugitive followed suit, though his hand lingered hesitantly on the holster. "Whoever it is," Martha whispered, "they're not alone." Indeed, moments later, several riders emerged from the darkness, their silhouettes stark against the moonlit horizon. Lanterns swung lazily from their saddles, illuminating the weary faces of men who wore the badges of authority. Sheriffs, deputies, bounty hunters, whatever their titles, their presence meant trouble. One of the riders dismounted, stepping forward with deliberate confidence. His hat shadowed his eyes, but his voice carried clearly in the stillness of the night. "We've been looking for you," he said, addressing the fugitive directly. "Long road you've traveled, boy. Time to end it." The fugitive felt the blood drain from his face. This was it, the culmination of everything he'd feared, everything he'd run from. Yet as he stared at the man before him, something unexpected happened. A memory surfaced, unbidden yet vivid, a memory of Samuel standing tall, refusing to back down even in the face of overwhelming odds. Taking a deep breath, the fugitive straightened his shoulders, meeting the rider's gaze without flinching. "Maybe it is," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "But maybe not." With those words, he stepped fully into the light, leaving the shadows of the barn and the ghosts of his past behind. What came next would depend not on fate or circumstance, but on the choices he made in this moment. And though the road ahead promised challenges far greater than any he'd faced before, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't run anymore. For the first time in years, he felt ready to fight, not just for himself, but for the truth, the justice, and the redemption that awaited him beyond the horizon. The rider, a man whose weathered face bore the marks of countless nights spent under the stars, studied the fugitive with an intensity that could cut through steel. His badge gleamed faintly in the lantern light, a symbol of authority and justice. Or so it claimed to be. But the fugitive saw something else in those eyes, a hunger not for truth, but for the bounty that came with capturing a wanted man. "You're coming with us," the rider declared, his voice as firm as the grip on his revolver. No need for trouble tonight. Behind him, the other riders shifted uneasily, their hands hovering near their holsters. The tension in the air was electric, crackling like the dry brush that surrounded them. Martha and her companion exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. For all her earlier words of encouragement, she now seemed resigned, as though accepting the inevitable. But the fugitive refused to yield. Not yet. Not without a fight. "I'm not going anywhere until I hear what you have to say," he replied, his tone measured but unyielding. "Who sent you? What do you really want?" The rider chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "You think we owe you explanations? You're a criminal. Boy, a thief, a murderer. That's all anyone needs to know." Murderer. The word hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. It wasn't entirely false. Blood had been spilled that night in Red Rock Junction, lives forever altered by one desperate act. Yet the full story remained buried beneath layers of lies and half-truths. Truths Samuel had taken to his grave. Truths the fugitive was only beginning to uncover. "And if I don't go quietly," he pressed, his hand inching closer to his gun. The rider's smile widened, revealing teeth yellowed by years of tobacco. "Then we'll make sure you don't leave this place alive." Before either side could escalate further, Martha stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Wait!" she cried, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. "There's more to this than you understand. Let him speak. Let him explain. Then decide whether he deserves your justice." The rider hesitated, glancing briefly at his companions before turning back to Martha. "Explain how?" he demanded. "How does a dead man write letters from beyond the grave?" All eyes turned to the fugitive, who stood frozen for a moment, caught between revelation and silence. Could he trust these strangers, men armed and ready to take him in, to listen to his story? Or would they dismiss it as nonsense, another ploy to escape capture? Taking a deep breath, he began. "Samuel Jackson isn't dead," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Not in the way you think. He faked his death to protect me, to keep me safe from men like you." A murmur rippled through the ranks of the riders, disbelief evident in their expressions. One of them spat onto the ground, muttering under his breath about liars and scum. Another tightened his grip on his rifle, clearly itching for a reason to use it. "The proof is in there," the fugitive continued, pointing toward the barn. "Documents, photographs, letters, all written by Samuel himself. If you're truly seeking justice, then look at the evidence before passing judgment." For a long moment, no one moved. The wind picked up, swirling dust around their feet, while the stars above watched silently, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. Finally, the lead rider nodded curtly to one of his deputies. "Check it out," he ordered, "but don't let him out of your sight." As the deputy entered the barn, the fugitive felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Perhaps, just perhaps, the truth would prevail. But even as he clung to that fragile belief, he knew better than to let his guard down completely. Minutes passed in agonizing silence. Inside the barn, the deputy sifted through the documents, occasionally pausing to examine a photograph or read a passage aloud. Outside, the riders waited impatiently, their horses shifting restlessly beneath them. Martha and her companion stood nearby, their faces masks of anticipation. Finally, the deputy emerged, holding the letter addressed to the fugitive. "It's genuine," he announced, his voice tinged with surprise. This changes things." The lead rider snatched the letter from his deputy's hand, scanning its contents with growing disbelief. When he finished reading, he looked up at the fugitive, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. "So it's true," he growled. "Your friend played us all, for years." "Not just you," the fugitive replied quietly. "Me too. Everyone involved. But the question is, now that you know the truth, what will you do about it?" The rider didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to his men, issuing quiet commands that set them into motion. Two of them dismounted, tying their horses securely before entering the barn to gather the remaining evidence. Another rode off into the night, presumably to deliver the news to higher authorities. Meanwhile, the lead rider approached the fugitive, his movements deliberate and controlled. "You're still a wanted man," he said, his voice lacking the previous venom. "But maybe there's room for mercy, for justice rather than vengeance." And with that, the fugitive realized the impossible had happened. The tide had turned, not because of guns or fists, but because of truth. A truth buried deep, dragged into the light by the unlikely actions of the goat and the courage of a man willing to face his past. The night air grew cooler as the riders prepared to leave, their lanterns casting long shadows across the barn and the surrounding land. The fugitive stood quietly, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The letter from Samuel weighed heavily in his pocket, a tangible reminder of the brotherhood they had shared and the sacrifices made for survival. Martha approached him, her expression a blend of relief and concern. "You've got a tough road ahead," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But at least now you have a chance to clear your name." He nodded, grateful for her support, but still unsure of the path forward. "I owe Samuel more than just clearing my name," he replied. "I need to make things right, to honor what he did." Her companion, who had remained silent through much of the exchange, stepped forward. "There are people who might help you," he offered gruffly. "Contacts in towns up north who owe favors. If you're willing to trust us, we can put you in touch." The fugitive hesitated, weighing the offer carefully. Trust was a rare commodity in his world, one not easily given or earned. But something about these two, Martha's determination and her companion's quiet strength, made him believe they were genuine. "All right," he said finally, "let's do it." As the group began to move out, the goat that had played such an unexpected role in the events of the night wandered lazily behind them, bleating softly as if bidding farewell to the drama it had unwittingly helped unfold. The journey north was arduous, marked by cold nights and endless miles of rugged terrain. Along the way, the fugitive pieced together more of Samuel's story, uncovering fragments of a life lived in shadows and sacrifice. Each revelation brought both clarity and pain, forcing him to confront the choices that had led him to this point. In small towns scattered along the trail, whispers of the fugitive's case began to spread. Some believed his story, moved by the evidence of Samuel's selflessness. Others remained skeptical, unwilling to let go of their preconceived notions of guilt and innocence. Yet slowly, surely, the tide shifted. Letters and documents gathered from the barn found their way into the hands of influential figures, each piece adding weight to the fugitive's claim of wrongful accusation. One evening, as they camped beneath a canopy of stars so vast it seemed to stretch forever, Martha turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if none of this had occurred? If Samuel hadn't taken the fall?" The question lingered in the air, unanswered yet deeply felt. The fugitive stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker. "Maybe we'd still be running," he admitted finally. "Hiding from the law, always looking over our shoulders. Or maybe we'd have found another way. But now—" Martha pressed gently. "Now," he said, his voice firm despite the lingering uncertainty, "now I have a chance to build something better, to prove that Samuel's sacrifice wasn't in vain." Their journey eventually led them to a sprawling city nestled between rolling hills and wide rivers. Here, amidst bustling streets and towering structures of stone and steel, the fugitive sought out those who could lend their voices to his cause: lawyers, journalists, even former lawmen willing to hear his side of the story. With each meeting, the walls of suspicion and hostility crumbled further, replaced by a growing chorus of supporters eager to see justice served in its truest form. Yet challenges remained. Powerful forces resisted the fugitive's efforts, clinging to outdated beliefs and personal agendas. There were threats, both veiled and overt, designed to intimidate him into silence. But he refused to back down, drawing strength from memories of Samuel and the unwavering belief that the truth would ultimately prevail. Months passed, each day bringing new trials and triumphs. And then one fateful morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, word reached the fugitive. His case had been reviewed, the evidence accepted, the charges against him were dropped, his name cleared. Standing atop a hill overlooking the city, the fugitive allowed himself a moment of reflection. The weight that had once pressed upon his shoulders was gone, replaced by a sense of liberation so profound it brought tears to his eyes. He thought of Samuel, of the goat that had dragged him into the light, of Martha and her companion, who had stood by him when all seemed lost. And he knew without a shadow of doubt that this was only the beginning, for while his own battle was won, there were countless others like him, men and women caught in cycles of injustice and despair. Inspired by his experience, the fugitive vowed to dedicate his life to helping them, to fighting for the kind of justice that transcended mere laws and embraced the humanity within every soul. As the wind carried the first rays of dawn across the land, the fugitive descended the hill, ready to embrace whatever challenges awaited. His past was no longer a burden but a foundation, shaping the man he was destined to become. And though the road ahead promised neither ease nor certainty, he walked it with purpose, guided by the light of truth and the unyielding spirit of redemption.